welcome to Real Estate Live's UK second week of events in 2021. Our week of free to attend virtual events run 3 times a year in February, June and October. The programme is brought to you by White Label, our partners and sponsors, and we'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of the organisations that have contributed to the exceptional lineup taking place this week. And a special thanks to Herts IQ for sponsoring this session. During the sessions this week, places across the UK will be showcasing investment opportunities and industry-leading experts from the public and private sectors will be discussing new ideas and topical issues relating to property. You can view the full programme and sessions taking place on realestatelive.co.uk, and you can also look back at sessions that have taken place this week. Before we begin, I'd just like to remind you to please feel free to ask questions using Zoom's Q&A function, which you will find on the bottom of your taskbar. I'm now delighted to introduce the chair of the session, Andy Venables, Managing Director of Hillsgreen. Over to you, Andy.
Thank you, Julie. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for attending this morning's session on a topic which is very close to my heart. So we're discussing what role will Agritech play in creating a more sustainable world. And I'm very lucky to be joined by a really talented and diverse panel today to discuss all things Agritech. So in terms of my background, I'm a farmer by trade, but I'm a managing director of a business called Hillsgreen. I spent early part of my career in marketing, digital marketing, and 5 years ago decided to set up a business that combined my 2 passions. So that's farming, food and agriculture with digital marketing. So we work with a number of rural agri-food businesses to help them grow online. And with my farming hat on, I'm still very much involved in the family dairy farm. There's 350 cow herd up in Macclesfield in Cheshire. And since I've been back involved in that family business over the last 5 years, we've looked at how Agritech can improve the farm, improving its efficiencies and ultimately the profitability of the business. So in terms of today's session, there's plenty of content to discuss in what is very hot topics at the minute when it comes to Agritech, but also sustainability and the environment. In terms of the session, I will try and keep it as informal as possible. I want you all to get as much out of it. And so feel free to chip in and ask questions. There is a Q&A area on Zoom, so any burning questions you've got, just pop your questions in there and I will put it to the panel. We've already had a number of questions that have been pre-sent through, so we will kick off with them. But like I say, keen to encourage discussion this morning. So before we kick off and go into the questions, I would like the panel to introduce themselves. So I'm going to kick off with Nicole.
Good morning. Thanks, Andy. Thanks for having us here again. I'm Nicole Satt. I'm the CEO of Rothamsted Enterprises. Rothamsted Enterprises started in 2015, and we are at the home of Rothamsted Research. So our role is not academic or science, it's to bring agritech innovators, entrepreneurs to work with our scientists. And we manage the buildings and the lab space on site and really harness the introductions to drive innovation forward.
Perfect. We'll keep going around the table first. So Matt, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Matt Chlebek. I am the co-founder and chief agronomist of a vertical farming company called Harvest London. Judging by the name, we're based in London and we grow leafy greens and herbs for the restaurant industry and more.
Perfect. Good morning, James.
Good morning, and thanks for having us. I'm James Lowenberg-DeBoer. I'm the Elizabeth Creak Professor of Agritech Economics, and my role at Harper Adams University is to assess the economic implications of all kinds of agritech innovations. In particular, I'm the economist for Hands Free Farm, and so I spend a lot of time focused on the role of autonomous crop equipment and artificial intelligence. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Peter.
Hi, thanks for having me along. My name is Peter Cook. I'm Director of Food, Drink and Agriculture at a thing called Opportunity Northeast in the northeast of Scotland. We're a private sector economic development organisation funded actually by a thing called the Wood Foundation, which is really an oil business. We're working on the transition of an area that's been very dependent on the energy industry into other industries. We have a large food and drink sector. I look after the food, drink and agri part, working with businesses, and part of that is trying to stimulate the development of digital solutions along the supply chain to create competitive advantage, and clearly Agri Tech is important there.
Perfect, thanks Peter. And Richard.
Good morning, thanks Andy. So I'm Richard Vecqueray, CEO of Map of Ag. Map of Ag's a global data platform business. We bring together farm data, both for the benefit of farmers and for the industry that support those farmers beyond the farm gate. So my background is I'm a vet, and my interest is in using farm data to deliver scaled change across populations of farms.
Perfect. And very good they are at it too, because we also work very closely with Map of Ag on our family farm. So I'm going to kick off with Nicole first. So Rothamsted, will you just tell us a little bit about the Agritech companies that you've got based there, and what do you do to attract and retain them, and I suppose help them grow really?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So we started in 2015. We started because actually we've got the world leading science and experts. So the attraction, I suppose, and I've got a couple of slides just to help me facilitate this answer, because it's quite a broad one for us. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to share this for the audience because it might not be familiar for what we do. So can you see that? There you go. So our buildings, I suppose, and what's important, we're based on about 800 acres. So we've got, whilst the wonderful buildings are there, we're 25 minutes from London, and we've got really good international links. So there's a lot of activity over internationally with us as well. And we are an open campus. So we've got the wonderful buildings, scientific expertise, but it's that nice place to come meet someone for a coffee and discuss those entrepreneurs and ideas. But also part of Herts IQ, the sponsors today, we're part of one of the 7 enterprise zone sites in Hertfordshire. Now, why is that important? And this, I suppose, sums up, whilst we're very good on campus to start those innovations, credible checks on prototypes, what we can't provide is that scale up. So we can support them till about 10-man people, 10-man labs, 10-man office. But actually, the Herts IQ is then going to be our grow-on space where you can base yourself for manufacturing or prototyping. This is we're creating a real hub in Hertfordshire. It's really about the cluster and links. So the actual attraction, why companies, and we've done quite a lot of research into this. The science, first and foremost, we've got 177 years of scientific research expertise. But we do have quite a broad range of size of labs and office spaces. So we have those business support activities. So whilst innovators and entrepreneurs might be fantastic at the innovation side of things, access to funding or drafting out finance applications, sometimes we need a bit of support for people to grow up and grow the business and scale. So the tenant community, we've got 26 tenants at the moment. They're very supportive of one another. And where one person's tried something and failed, they're very open. And that knowledge transfer really builds that thriving tenant community. So it's not just the buildings, it's that cluster, it's that ecosystem that we're creating on site that we're lucky to have. So some of our tenants, we've got startup small companies, some spin outs from Rothamsted, some from Imperial College, where they start and trial their ideas. But then we've got the big, world leading Gowan, the head office based here at Rothamsted as well. So a real diverse mix. And what's happening for us at the moment, we're seeing different tech companies come in, which is driving that innovation forward, testing new ideas with the scientific research we have. So what's next for us? we're nearly full with lab space. So what we need to do now is really look at our campus and understand their companies' needs to grow and develop. So we've got that expansion plan already. We've just created a new, office hub, innovation space where people can come together. But we're really looking at strengthening our position in Hertfordshire and the national capabilities, really to drive that innovation agenda forward. So, just to summarise, I suppose, we're based nice proximity to London, taking advantage of the Cambridge-Oxford arc, but also we've got the right buildings, but also the infrastructure of business support to enable people to grow. So it really does attract, and it's still attracting different sizes of companies to the Agritech sector.
Thanks, Nicole. And I know if you guys were based up in Cheshire, I will be down there like a shot. So anybody in and around the area that is started or working for an Agritech business, then they should definitely come and chat to you. We're going to move on to just looking at vertical farming. So Matt's our resident expert here. And I'm just keen to understand a little bit in terms of how is vertical farming supporting sustainability and what is needed to help the sector grow?
Sure. In terms of, specifically with our company, we like to focus our activities on crops that are either usually imported or eaten out of season. For example, we grow a lot of basil. It's only grown a couple of months of the year in Italy, and the rest of the time it's grown in Ethiopia and Israel and beyond. And so because we work with the restaurant industry, a lot of chefs don't know that their parsley is imported half the time, let alone things like their basil. They seem to think that, the parsley just grows all around us all the time, even in December. And then you start moving on to things like Thai herbs. They have to come even further. And so what we try and do is remove basically air miles from the equation. So, for example, our customers, everything, because we're based in London, our customers are in London, everything's delivered on bikes. Everything goes from harvest to the kitchens in 4 hours. We did a harvest this morning. Our herbs will already be in the kitchens by the time I'm doing this talk now. It means that they last longer, so there's less waste. Generally, vertical farms use less water than traditional agriculture, but the figure depends who you talk to as to how big that figure is. But we certainly don't use any pesticides because it's a controlled environment. Were you to get any pests, it'd be biocontrol to sort them out, but we don't use any pesticides. I don't think there's an excuse for not using renewable energy. It's very easy to switch your energy provider to renewable energy. Whilst our electricity bill is large, that's on us to deal with. And we do work very closely with our energy supplier to, help drive efficiencies there. And what we'd like to do in the future is start doing things like co-locating alongside anaerobic digesters to generate energy and CO2 and heat from our, root waste and so on. And so they're the kind of main advantages. I think the other thing is just that, by placing us in an urban setting, it sort of allows a sort of greater connection with where the food's coming from. In a lot of cases, we have a lot of chefs visit. They can just pop down the road. They can ask me what they want. They can bring some of them bring me seeds, and I grow them for them. We do all sorts of stuff. We've grown hundreds and hundreds of different things. And so whilst there is, there's a long way to go to becoming sort of more carbon neutral, we do think that we are an alternative method to acquiring some of these imported and out of season produce.
Fantastic, Matt. That's really, really interesting. And I know in terms of the business, you've only been operating since 2017. Considerable growth, particularly when we've had the pandemic and you've been mainly supplying restaurants. Yes.
Luckily, it turns out people still need to eat during the pandemic. So we did a lot of trade on the takeaway market, and a lot of our clients pivoted to new business models. So a lot of the restaurants were doing, takeaway, Deliveroo, and so on and so on.
Okay, good stuff. Right, I've got a question for James. So what do you believe are the biggest innovations coming from the agri-tech sector now, and how will these support the sustainability agenda?
That's a big question, but I'd like to draw your attention to 4 technologies and point out some of their sustainability implications. One of those is autonomous crop equipment, and that discussion usually starts with the scarcity of agricultural labor, and this occurs all over the world, but particularly in the UK, the COVID pandemic pointed out the dependence on migrant labor for certain agricultural operations. But beyond that, autonomous crop equipment has many implications for sustainability, because if you're using equipment with drivers, there's a tremendous motivation to have bigger and heavier equipment. And that has side effects in terms of soil compaction and soil health. It has implications in terms of field size and wildlife field biodiversity, because with big equipment, that's most efficient in large rectangular fields. But with autonomous equipment, it's much easier to farm small, irregularly shaped fields with hedges and infield trees and wetlands and so on. Also, autonomous equipment reduces the pressure on time for the field operations. And that allows more opportunity to use a second technology, which is machine vision for weed and pest control. So there's lots of people who say it's not so much that the pesticides we use are wrong, it's we apply them incorrectly. We tend to apply them broadcast over whole fields. If we went to a system where we were targeting the application of a herbicide, say with a few drops on a given leaf, the amount of pesticides would be reduced overall. And then there's a possibility, at least in some circumstances, of going entirely to mechanical weeding, where the autonomous equipment identifies the weed and weeds it out, much as you would do on in your garden or in an allotment. To complement that, we have the development of artificial intelligence, or also called decision support in certain circumstances, to better adapt farm management to local conditions. So in the past, certainly for the last century or so, there's been many nationwide or county-wide, area-wide recommendations for farmers. Well, to make them more specific, we need to deal with lots of data, and AI can help us do that. And then a fourth one that complements all the others are the alternative energy sources. And we'd like to focus on those that change how we farm, because mobile energy in terms of fossil fuels has allowed us to do certain things that are very power intensive. Now, if we go to other sources, particularly electrical power, we have to change the way we farm, but that fits in with some of the other innovations that we're talking about. So there's a tremendous interaction between Agritech and sustainability.
Perfect. Very exciting stuff, really, particularly for, I suppose, a fair weather farmer like me that doesn't tend to get his hands dirty very often anymore. We'll go over to Peter. So it'd be interesting just to tell us a bit more about sort of the main changes in Agritech sector, particularly in your sort of area around the northeast Scotland, and what support is there to help sustainable projects.
So, I mean, I think the same here. Really, the emphasis early on was all on crop-based Agritech. It's mapping and variable rate, and I think that's become extremely well established. I think the opportunities have really changed for us. I think the big area of development is improving individual animal performance in extensive livestock systems. Consumers want extensive systems, high welfare systems, but the productivity is lower in them. So how do you make that work? And that's really monitors on individual animals, and it's water troughs that measure performance when animals come to drink, and do eye readings and all of that side of things. So I think that deploying monitors and a bit of automation related to it is where there's gathering data remotely, is where there's an enormous opportunity, I think, worldwide. And we certainly put effort into that, and have supported some businesses in that who have systems that monitor cattle when they come to drink, and do multiple sort of measurements, and the data they're generating is incredible. I think the second thing is the second change and opportunity that we've put effort into is whole supply chain monitoring. People want to know provenance, and they want measurements along the entire supply chain. So from the point the calf is born, right through to abattoir, right through to consumer. So you can scan the product, even in a restaurant, and you get the story of how it's produced. I mean, that's the big opportunity, really, isn't it? And we've certainly supported companies like there's the A&M group who operate, I think it's the largest auction market in Europe, and help them to put monitors along their whole system in a cloud-based database. I think those things are really important. I think the other thing related to that is the failure of the broadband network. It doesn't provide coverage. So we have a cooperative in the area who are trying to establish LoRaWAN-based networks that can get around that. I think that's really, really important, because even 5G seems to be a long way off and not have full coverage. And the ownership of sites by producers is really, really important. So we'll put effort into that. I think the third, change is carbon, sustainability and carbon. So that whole chain monitoring becomes really, really important, because policymakers are going to shape the way we produce things. So we have to have the data to defend and shape our systems. What is soil organic matter? What is nitrous, NO2 emissions? What are they? There's no real good data. So we have to put in the systems to do that. And the last thing, I think the big change is that we now have lots of data. Agritech has generated vast amounts of data. What we've had 15 years of field mapping. The folk on the call here are more expertise than me, but have we really used it? Do we really know what the patterns are? The soil versus yield patterns over time. So that's another piece I think is really important. How do you support it, and how have we changed them? Maybe we'll pick that up later. I think I've gone on long enough, but I think we've had a little agri-food tech project, get businesses to proof of concept. I think that's really important. We certainly provide a bit of seed funding as well. But I think a really big piece is that you get producers in amongst the tech community. We have a tech hub where we get digital businesses who have nothing to do with agriculture in amongst food and drink producers, and that's where you can get a lot of gain. And we have a tech hub that does that. We have a thing called Seed Pod, where we're really for food and drink businesses that brings those sort of initiatives together. And I think those things will be important in the future.
Good stuff. I found myself nodding to you throughout that, because in terms of the individual animal monitoring, it's something that we've embraced on farm, on our grazing farm. All of the cows have got basically computer chips in the room, and monitoring water consumption, heat detection, temperature, the health of the animal. I think that is really important when we put it into context in terms of what the demand on food production is going to be over the next 20 to 30 years, together with the challenges of carbon and being more sustainable. And the other point you raised there in terms of data, all I seem to do, whether it's the marketing business or the farming business, is bang on about data. And I think that's actually a very good link to bring in Richard Vecqueray. Map of Ag is a data and technology business, so be interested from your point of view in terms of how important is data and technology in the future of sort of sustainable agriculture sector?
Thanks, Andy. So the answer to that question is clearly that it'll be pivotal, absolutely essential. So to become more sustainable, both from an environmental and economic or an ethical perspective, agriculture absolutely needs to change, and that change needs to be wholesale over the next 15 years, over a period of time that some of us on this call, their careers have got left to run. I think yours has a bit longer, unfortunately, but so it's got to happen soon. It's got to happen quickly. So, of course, for farmers to be able to manage that change, they need to be able to measure their performance. That's got to be the first step. If you can measure it, you can manage it. So this is where Agritech comes in. And Agritech means you can measure. Modern Agritech means you can measure everything. You can do so live, and you can do so constantly. So as an example, a farmer, might have 40 harvests, 40 seasons in their career. They now, with the amount of data coming at them, they can condense that learning into one season and times that 40 times. So the speed of change, the speed of improvement can be exponential relative to what it's been. So we have we can measure pasture cover, the nitrogen content of a crop. We can measure the lameness in cows, temperatures in them. We can measure soil carbon, weather. We can do margin at a pixel level within a field. So, and that's a far from complete list, but you can immediately see, as Peter and James has raised, some of the challenges that go with that. So the technology is amazing, but we've gone from a sublime, low-tech, bucolic situation to a ridiculous tsunami containing millions of data points in disparate systems. So this is the challenge that Map of Ag is trying to address: bring that data together, distill it, make sense of it. So to conclude, really, I just want to give you sort of three examples, if I may. And the first two are from our head of analytics, Dr. Rosie Barraclough, who's recently out of Edinburgh University. So Rosie is also a part-time, like a couple of you on the call, as a part-time farmer, and she's used electronic identification of her sheep flock to improve the flock management. So she's assessed lamb performance out of the ewes to segregate the flock and to determine her culling policy between 2017 and 2020. And she's managed to reduce the average days that the lambs spend on the farm by 52 days. So over 200 lambs, that's 10,400 days. So that's exactly the same inputs into those lambs. So you imagine the impact if that's rolled out to a national scale on emissions, on drug use into those animals, and then the opportunity presented by the freed up resource, for the time and the crop that those lambs aren't eating. So the second example is from her PhD, which was on cow monitoring technologies, and again we've talked about that on this call. So, and she found quite interesting results, really, that 3 in 5 dairy farmers already using cow monitoring technologies, and only 18% of those had used a grant to fund that purchase. So we know that farmers are actively seeking now technologies. 96% of those farmers using the technology reported a benefit, describing them as useful, reliable, and practical. So it's great feedback, and quite surprising, I think, from the stereotype of farmers. So the challenges that they had were faults with those systems, incompatibility between the different systems, which we've alluded to again over a number of different talks, and the fact that they were difficult and time-consuming to use, not farmer-friendly. So my final example would be that the pandemic has accelerated the pace of digital transformation that agriculture needs to take. So Map of Ag, in a different part of the business, has interviewed 2,218 farmers over the last few months. And of those interviewed, 40% said that since the start of the pandemic, they'd experimented with a new digital technology that they wouldn't have used before the pandemic. So I think, if any positive can be drawn out of the last year, absolutely that's one of them. So I found that absolutely fascinating.
Fantastic, Richard. And I could see the panel nodding through those case studies, because I think when you actually bring it back to a farmer level, it's very powerful. I can see what we're managing to do on our farm, but when you show those examples, there is so many farmers willing to invest in technology. And I think what some people forget is that GPS was in tractors before it was in cars. Farmers might be known for being quite shrewd, but if they can see value, they will invest. And I suppose to comment on how my dad views the technologies, it's not always going to be 100% accurate, but it's definitely a great tool to just give you that tap on the shoulder and indicate when you've got a sick animal or yields are dropping or whatever, to make sure you're focused in the right way. Because years gone by, we were farming much smaller farms and therefore could oversee a little bit more what was going on. But now the scale of farms are bigger, and we need to use these technologies to improve efficiencies. We've got a couple of questions coming through the chat. A bit of a left field one, but I'll put it to the panel anyway. From Annie. So she's interested to find agricultural solutions for active volcano areas. Has anybody got any suggestions on that?
You could build a vertical farm next to one.
Well, yeah, unfortunately, I have no suggestions, but
I think the vertical farming is a great point. And you go to Iceland and you just look what they're doing there, and because you've got cheap electricity and heat, which are the key impact. That's been Matt's big pain points, and you just think the productivity that you can, if you've got cheap access to those two ththings. Wow,
Yeah.
There you go.
And heat capture. You probably, I don't know. I know quite a lot about how HVAC systems work, but I would imagine with the air being, especially in Iceland, the air being cold outside, it'd be interesting to know where in the world you're thinking about, I suppose.
Okay. And while you're on then, Matt, Gabrielle has sent in a question here. So he'd like to know, market-wise, how much is CEA taking over its share in the UK? Which cities and crops are having more success?
See, this is why you need my co-founder Chris on the call, because he has the answers. I saw that question from Gabriel and realised that I didn't know the answer to how much CEA is taking over. I will say that one thing is that we've found is one of the reasons that I don't know the answer to that question is it's quite difficult to find out the answers to these things, especially because some of the larger companies are quite private about what they are doing. What we know is that we are like an appreciable but relatively small but growing industry. There's a lot to go around. There's a lot of veg and fruit and everything else that needs to be consumed by this country or by any country. And our industry is showing some real growth. It's important to know that we're not trying to compete with traditional agriculture. We're an alternative, as I said, especially to getting on to the next part of this question, the crops that are not naturally grown in this country. We as a society want what we want when we want it, and invariably that means importing traditionally. And so if it has to come from abroad, we are a good solution to that. Controlled environment agriculture as a whole runs everything from greenhouses with good HVAC systems all the way through to what we do, which is a lot more closed than that. And then as a result, you're doing everything from salads all the way through to fruiting vines, tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, and so on. The possibilities are kind of limitless. I think, obviously things like wheat would probably be a bad idea. Need too big fields and grows too long. But anything that has a relatively quick turnaround, and that can be grown densely is very successful, we found.
Thanks, Matt. And I see that Dave's just posted on the Q&A section that there's a good read there on the grocer for anybody wanting more information on that.
Thanks, Dave.
So, Professor James, so Another question from Gabrielle in terms of, could you tell us a bit about the new developments in growing media, perhaps artificial soils, and how much is the research line contributing to growing rooted crops?
So as the agricultural economist, I can tell you more about why that would be important. That as the pandemic disruptions have shown us that long distance supply chains are not necessarily as reliable as we maybe thought they were, and as Matt has helped us understand the potential for controlled environment agriculture, indoor agriculture. Some of that requires artificial soils, growing mediums, and so on. And there's active research in that area to help make that kind of a system more effective. So that's what I can add at this point, and I'm sure there's soil scientists who can add more on the technical side.
Okay, good stuff. Well, while you're still unmuted, you've actually had another question come in from Phil Ellis. So, what is the number one most carbon intensive part of the food production process agriculture globally? And two, how can tech efforts be and capital mobilized to reduce efficiently and quickly this part of the process?
Wow, that's again, that's a difficult question depending on who you talk to. What kind of farming system are you talking about? Are you talking about horticulture or large-scale field crops, small farming, and so there's many sources of carbon in agriculture, and what it requires is dealing with many of those, and so that might require managing ruminant animals better to reduce methane emissions and other emissions. It requires managing the use of fossil fuels in crop production, the use of peatlands, for instance, for especially horticultural production, has enormous carbon implications. So it requires a holistic solution, I think, rather than pointing at one source or the other to solve all the problem.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. I think, everyone as part of the food supply chain has got their own part to play in how we reduce carbon emissions. But also feel something that the pandemic did help is, people realizing how they can reduce the carbon footprint via buying local and in-season produce. It's we're going to go on to another question very shortly, which in terms of the UK-Australian trade deal, but I still can't quite get my head around it, how we've got to all look to be more sustainable and reduce our carbon, yet it's perfectly fine to fly food over from Australia to the UK. But perhaps I wouldn't be very good on the BBC giving an unbiased opinion. But like what Matt's doing in terms of the vertical farming, and trying to reduce those food miles, is excellent. You're on the doorstep of your customer, and you've got bikes to take that food from when you harvest this morning to cooking this this lunchtime, which is fantastic. So on this Australian-UK trade deal, this question is coming to you, Peter. How do you think it will affect UK producers and the innovation landscape in the long run?
Thanks for that very simple question. I am, of course, an expert in UK-Australia trade deals. It actually is a question that's been asked a lot. Potentially, of course, they're very competitive in livestock production, large scale livestock ruminant production, especially, beef and sheep meat. And, there could be a threat there. Traditionally, I would have said if China was open to their product in Southeast Asia, we won't actually see a huge amount of product come here because they have good markets closer at hand. Of course, they have a bit of a fallout with China at the moment. So they may be looking for other markets. How will it affect us? I think it depends on consumer and retail reaction. Retailers really drive the whole thing, and if the welfare standards and production standards don't match what standards they set, then the product won't come in to the mainstream retail and may come into food service. To be positive, I think we have a lot to learn from each other. Australia in Agritech is a really interesting place. They've done a lot because they have large-scale livestock production with few people. And so they've got some interesting things. And overall, I think for us, it just means we've got to push ahead in our technical advantage. We have to deploy Agritech faster and also deploy it to help show what is unique about local production and the way we produce things. Agritech is a means of producing the data to show that sustainable production, what it actually looks like, and to prove it. So I think there's an opportunity in the whole Agritech thing there. So I hope that answers your question on the Australia deal.
Thanks, Peter. So just a reminder, for anybody else got any other questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A box. I'm just going to go to some that have already been sent in prior to the call. So one for James, really. We've not touched on Brexit so much yet, but how has that impacted the agri sector and more specifically Agritech?
Incredibly interesting question, and particularly coming in as an American from the outside, looking at what's happening, it's very interesting. Yes, there are some immediate impacts, particularly on exporters of UK agricultural products, meat and dairy products. Fish processors have faced extra barriers, but the big changes are still coming. One of those will be in trade, and we just mentioned talking about that with the example of the Australian trade deal. But probably an even bigger change will be this change of ag policy to focus on environmental management. So this idea of public money for public goods instead of subsidy for production. And in the short run, what that's created is uncertainty, because farmers don't know what the rules will be and what the system will be. So the government is trying out various approaches, because no one has really done this well yet. There's been a number of countries in Europe in particular who've tried. And in the long run, this creates both opportunities and challenges for Agritech. And Richard talked about the use of data. Up until now, most of that data has been collected to guide production decisions, so yield monitors and so on and so forth. But what we need now to complement that are data to guide environmental decisions. So how do you measure and quantify the biodiversity in your fields, for instance? How do you quantify other aspects, say, of soil health or other things? And the real challenge, I think, for the agricultural sector is how to combine the opportunities and challenges created by Brexit with the opportunities and challenges created by Agritech. And because I work a lot with autonomous equipment, My favorite example is once you take drivers off of equipment, the economies of scale change totally. And this idea that bigger is better in farming becomes very much different. And so this gives an opportunity for medium and small size farms to produce a bigger part of the overall product, to create thriving businesses, maybe around specialized products, but combining those specialized farm businesses with non-agricultural diversification attempts, the wedding venues and the camping and all those other kinds of businesses that British farmers are trying. And Agritech provides some of that opportunities by removing the pressure to reduce labor. It opens a door to address those things and potentially to compete with some of those world-class agricultural producers like the Australians. So, like so many other things, Brexit is both a challenge and an opportunity for the British ag sector.
Good stuff. Really, really thought-provoking, that, James. And I suppose from Brexit to the pandemic, Richard, you already mentioned how the pandemic has actually forced change, particularly with farmers. They were already embracing technology, but I think just on a wider scale, actually getting them to embrace more of it. What else have you seen at Map of Ag, and how has the pandemic affected Agritech?
So as James, I think, alluded to, we obviously had a labour challenge because of the migrant labour, and that's affected sort of the produce sector and dairy, which relies on a lot of sort of Eastern European sort of labour coming in. So we've distinctly seen a move, an interest into robotic milking, for sure. So a lot of interest around that, big, substantial uptake with those. I mean, in many ways, farming, in the broader sense, has been fantastically sort of insulated. I've got one of my farming mates. I think he's worn a face mask twice in the last year, which is just incredible. Which might say more for his lack of being an unreconstructed man, but it's in some ways we've been very lucky relative to the hospitality industry and other ways. But I think the other key way it's been affected was the ability for the assurance sector to operate. We talked a bit about differentiating the industry and the need to differentiate the industry in more of a free trade world, because we have ministers that stand up and claim that the animal welfare standards of the UK are the highest in the world, and we need to make you can debate that point. We're not bad. I'm not sure we're the best, but we need to become we need to differentiate ourselves. So the pandemic really saw the inability for farm assurance individuals to go down and assure those farms, and so the food that assurance sort of chain, the assurance through the supply chain, did break down in the early stages, and obviously that created quite a panic, because we need to be able to assure that the food is safe that's on the shelves within the UK supermarkets. So actually that drove a big digital transformation in the assurance sector, which is ongoing. So we've had, since the start of the pandemic, I think over 10,000 farms onboarded for the Red Tractor sort of farm assurance program to do digital remote assurance sort of thing. So that's just the first stage of really a move to using sort of data to assure from a much more sort of once a year sort of hit, which is a pretty ineffective way of saying whether a farm is a good farm or a bad farm or a poor farm, to a much more live assessment, which is much less, it's great for the farmer because they don't, it's just data they're using anyway. So they hate those visits. It's time consuming. They can't really see the point because they just want to get on and farm. So if we can move to do that, that assessment much better and do it remotely on a much more live basis, and the pandemic forms the catalyst for that, then that could be another long-term positive that comes out of it. And it's something that really I've seen wholesale change. You would have said it was impossible 18 months ago, what's been achieved, but it's really quite exciting, the sort of potential it opens. But there's a lot more work to do to make it easy for farmers. I think it's still a lot of work, the assurance process for farmers, and we should be able to take a lot of that friction away and do it better, which will be better for the people beyond the farm gate and also better for the farmers, which is a great solution.
I'll unmute. Just while you're on there, Richard, quick questions just come in terms of how is remote auditing made verifiable, able to verify it?
So at the moment, that takes place when they can go on the farm. So they would, it's basically the standard audit. So they would upload all the evidence, the standard evidence. So the documents and the data and that would sit alongside the standard that they're trying to meet, be that for a supermarket or for a scheme like Red Tractor. And then the assurance body would then, the auditing body would then essentially do a video call with the farmer, and then they would work through that evidence, challenge the evidence that has been presented, and then also perform sort of video and photo evidence around the farm. So it's sort of looking at all the things that they would look at normally on the farm, but actually not actually setting foot on the farm, but seeing is believing. So they can actually do their phones and their computers to provide the video and the photographic evidence of what's taking place. But there is, as I alluded to before, there is, relative to 20 years ago now, there is this absolute plethora of data that is available on a live basis that really can, you can use that data to risk assess those farms. You can say, look, this has all the characteristics of a great, highly performing farm. We don't need to visit this farm, but this spectrum of data is maybe just giving us some flags here that we just need to work with this individual to sort of look at this specific area of what they're doing. So there are some exciting opportunities presented.
Good stuff. And I think don't get me wrong, the pandemic has been tough for everybody, but with a crisis it does present opportunity, and I do think for Agri Tech it's pushed things through so much quicker, and there is big opportunities there. I am conscious of time, but there is one area that we haven't really discussed, and there's a question come in from Phil, so just I will try and summarise it, but effectively it's in regards to carbon emissions and what is the global annual impact of freighting food by air to market, either tonnes of carbon, and how much potential is there to reduce this carbon footprint with central government policymakers forcing local food supply to be local. And he gives the example here of, each time he's at the supermarket buying tomatoes or fruit cabbages, where in the world have these been imported from? And therefore the daily impact on the transportation through air must be enormous. Matt, do you have any opinion on that, or put it out to the wider panel if anybody would like to chip in on that answer?
I would say that whilst I don't know a figure for the amount of carbon produced by air freighting, of course, even if it's air freighting you're looking at, it's also the trucks that get the produce to the airport. They're refrigerated. It's the storage when it lands in this country. It's not just the air freight itself, it's also the stuff around it. I think in terms of the questions surrounding tomatoes and local growing and polytunnels, I mean, it's two issues there. One is the consumer. If we want tomatoes in January, we're going to have to import them. If we all ate seasonally and locally, I think our diets would be different, but there'd be a lot less importing. And there is a lot of specifically tomato growing in the UK at the right times of year. I mean, my green growth has got beautiful tomatoes from the Isle of Wight in at the moment. Whenever it does, I buy them all up because they're fantastic. They're better than anything else I get from anywhere else at all, but they're only available for certain months of the year. But yeah, we've tried to calculate the sort of exact carbon footprint of, for example, importing basil. And whilst we can get pretty good approximations, it's very difficult because it's quite, to us at least, and maybe there's someone out there who can help us, it seems like a very, what's the word I'm looking for? Not shadowy, but sort of, there's not good data on this stuff that we can find. But if someone else out there has got it, I'm all ears.
And Peter, have you got a point there that you wanted to raise?
I just think you have to be very careful on the carbon thing to make sure you do the right calculations, because it's very easy as a policy maker to say, flying stuff around the world's bad. But if you take the example of shellfish, which has been flown from Scotland to Southeast Asia, you'd say that's terrible. It's just horrendous. But it goes in the holds of passenger planes that are going there anyway. So you actually reduce the carbon footprint for the people who are flying there because you've got something else of value that's going with it. So I think we have to not be black and white about carbon. You've really got to dig into it and get the true picture. It's the same thing with, ruminants and methane, but those cattle are probably, because of grazing systems, are massively increasing the organic matter in soils and storing a lot of carbon. And if you remove them, what you'd probably do is you'd hack down more of the Brazilian rainforest to grow beef there and import it here. So you have to, I think there just is a much more complicated debate to have and a nuanced debate. We have to reduce carbon. We've all got to do it. Agri Tech does a big piece of it, but we have to get down to, not black and white and deciding, well, that must be bad. Let's wipe it out. Let's look at the numbers and be nuanced, and all of these things which have been spoken today, vertical farming and everything else, can play a part in it. And we have to be nuanced.
Perfect. Some really good points there, Peter. And we are coming towards the end, but I'd just like to put out a final question to Nicole. You've sat there quite quietly for the last 10-15 minutes, but just in terms of to wrap up, what do you think is going to be the biggest demand from the agri-tech sector in the next 5 years?
From a property point of view, I think the speed we can get property, these scale-up companies are phenomenal. I mean, it's been lovely to hear, the end users. I'm kind of a little bit further removed from that. So listening to what the innovations that happen at Rothamsted and the end user farming point, and the stats that Richard said were brilliant. But the speed these companies grow from a retail and a property point of view, how quickly you can scale up, but the digitalization and the tech that is required. So in a building perspective, how electrical capacity and the infrastructure of that needs to support these businesses, because the digital and the tech and the kit that is coming into this space is so heavy orientated. We just really need to be able to support that to allow the investors and the innovators to drive these new ideas forward. So that's from our point.
Okay, thanks, Nicole. And I think really, we could probably talk about this subject all day. There's some very passionate people around this virtual table, and as Peter just alluded to, it's really quite a complicated subject matter. Just agri-tech on its own, let alone looking at the sustainability and environmental side of things as well. But hopefully it's given you all a bit of food for thought, shall we say, for this morning. I know there has been some more questions come in. I'm pretty sure most of us are on LinkedIn, so I'm sure if you want to get in touch with the panel directly, send them a request and drop them a message. But from my point of view, thank you very much for taking the time to join us this morning. Thank you very much for our panel for contributing. This hour has gone very fast, especially when it's a subject you're passionate about. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, and I'll now hand over to Julie.
Thank you, Andy, and echo what Andy said. Thank you so much to the panel for joining us today, and Andy for chairing it. I mean, it probably could have gone on another hour. It would have been great. So moving on to our next session, we've got the last one of the day, which will come up on the screen in a moment. We have our final lunchtime talk with Dr. Wei Yang, and the chair for this session is Laura Edgar, who is the news editor at The Planner. Registration link will be in the chat shortly, and as a reminder, you can go onto the website and look back at all the sessions that have taken place this week. So I hope you can tune into our final session. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again in October.